Welcome, my gamer tag is Cowboy Tori and I make videos on games. I make a video log every week, so a like or subscription would highly be appreciated. In today's vlog I want to talk about the HBO show The Last of Us. Full disclaimer, I have played the game on PlayStation, but I haven't seen the show yet. All the information that I have comes either from the game or in this case from the various scene and show recaps already available on YouTube. And what I have to say about the show will probably upset the fanboys. But here it is. The outbreak as portrayed in the show could not have happened or would not have happened based on its own evidence and its own logic. In episode 3, Joel gives this explanation to Ellie when she asks him how the outbreak took place.
So everything came crashing down in one day?
Pretty much.
How? I mean, no one's infected with cordyceps. Everybody's fine, eating in restaurants and flying in planes, and then all at once? How did it even start? If you have to get bit to be infected, then who bit the first person? Was it a monkey? I bet it was a monkey.
It wasn't a monkey. I thought you went to school.
Fedra school, teaches how their shitty government failed to prevent a pandemic.
No one knows for sure, but best guess, cordyceps mutated. Some of it got into the food supply, probably a basic ingredient like flour or sugar. There were certain brands of food that were sold everywhere, all across the country, across the world. Bread, cereal, pancake mix. You eat enough of it, it'll get you infected. So the tainted food all hits the store shelves around the same time Thursday. People bought it, ate some Thursday night or Friday morning. Day goes on. They started to get sick. Afternoon, evening, they got worse. Then they started biting. Friday night, September 26, 2003. By Monday, everything was gone.
It makes more sense than monkeys. Thanks.
Sure.
In episode 2, we are shown that the cordyceps mutation and start of the infections happened in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Jadi kapan ini terjadinya, Pak?
Kurang lebih 30 jam yang lalu, Bu.
Di mana?
Di pabrik tepung dan gabah di barat kota.
Lahan yang sempurna untuk itu. Lalu,
Seorang perempuan yang tiba-tiba melakukan kekerasan menyerang 4 orang rekan kerja dan menggigit 3 orang diantaranya. Mereka kemudian mengunci perempuan itu di kamar mandi sampai kemudian polisi datang. Perempuan itu mencoba menyerang dan terpaksa harus ditembak.
lalu bagaimana dengan orang yang digigitnya?
Dibawa untuk diobservasi. Sayangnya beberapa jam kemudian telah menjadi keharusan sesuai dengan prosedur. Mereka harus tetap dieksekusi.
Siapa yang menggigit perempuan itu, Pak?
Kami tidak tahu, Ibu.
Jadi artinya mereka masih berkeliaran di luar sana. Lalu pekerja yang lain bagaimana?
14 orang hilang.
As described by Joel, the outbreak in the United States took place on September 26th. The Jakarta scene is set on September 24th, 2 days before the US outbreak, and importantly at that time, only 18 people in Indonesia might have been infected with cordyceps. The female employee, the colleagues she bit, and the 14 colleagues that are missing. As Joel correctly describes it, the initial cordyceps infections started because people ate contaminated food. Flour is a basic product and is used in a lot of food products, so it's possible. And indeed, some products are available worldwide. But the timeline of the infection, as described by Joel, does not add up. There are two methods to become infected and turn into a cordyceps zombie. First method is by eating contaminated food. And according to Joel, eating it will turn you within a couple of days. The second method is through biting. In episode 2 it is described by the army officer that you will turn within a few hours after being bitten. And in other episodes we see characters getting bitten and showing very quickly symptoms of infection. It is plausible that there is a difference in turning time between being bitten and eating spores. Perhaps when you eat the spores it takes them time to grow in you, while when you're bitten you perhaps get infected with a full-grown cordyceps fungus. However, the infection through contaminated food is not and can't be done in 2 days as described by Joel. And the answer for that lays in the distance between the United States and Indonesia. How long does it take to transport the flour or any derivative products from the Indonesian mills to the States? In all likelihood that happens by boat, so that will take about 55 to 60 days before the boat reaches America. Then you still have to add a couple of days for the products to get distributed across country and for people to buy them. So let's say that we can add an additional 5 days to that. So if the people, according to Joel, started to consume the contaminated food on September 26th, that would mean that the contaminated shipment must have left the mill in Indonesia around 65 days prior to the outbreak, on and around July 23rd. Now I also researched the flour mills that exist in Indonesia, and indeed these are the biggest in the world. However, in my research I discovered that 60% of their production is intended for the domestic market. Only 5% is exported directly, the rest is used in derivative products. So, whereas the contaminated food products could only have arrived in the States around September 21st, the first deliveries in Indonesia should have happened much earlier, probably around end of July. So, if the outbreak in Jakarta or in Indonesia could only happen around 2 days prior to the outbreak in the States, that would have required that the contaminated food products delivered in Indonesia remained on the shelves unconsumed and unsold until about perhaps a week before the US outbreak, so 2 days before the outbreak in Jakarta. That would mean that if you look at it from an economic point of view, that shopkeepers have at least 60 days of uncontaminated food in their warehouse, in their stocks, in their inventory, that they kept selling before they start selling the contaminated food. That's a huge amount of money that is locked into a stock. There's no shopkeeper, no grocery store, no food manufacturer, not even an accountant will allow that, because it will cost that company too much money in unsold stock. So, if, as Joel explained, you turn after a few days if you ate spores, Indonesia should have experienced its outbreak much earlier, perhaps around mid-August. And if the outbreak took place in mid-August, the Indonesian army would not have waited until end September to whisk that professor away from her lunch to get a second opinion. By that time, news flashes would already be going around. People would have been warned, other countries would have been warned, and would have been starting taking measures to prevent the food from arriving in the States. So, we can plainly say the Joel theory of turning after consuming spores within a few days is wrong. But what is then the exact time? How long does it take you when you consume the spores before you turn into a zombie? And how long is that? And then it has to make sense within the events of the show. Well, if we assume that female employee in the mill, or either one of her colleagues, is patient zero, and we know that patient zero can only be infected by eating the cordyceps spores, add to that the shipping time it takes for the goods to arrive in America, well, that would mean that the incubation time for the cordyceps, so the time between you've eaten the spores and you turn into a zombie, is probably around 60 days. But if it takes the spore 60 days to grow in you and to turn you into a cordyceps zombie, that would mean that the victims in the States, because there is only 2 days difference between an outbreak in Jakarta and in the United States. That cannot be from the shipment that left in July to America. That can't be the infected shipment. So it must be a shipment that has left Jakarta much earlier, probably around the end of May. But then that adds another question to the logic, is how much of the flour in the mills is contaminated? If the entire production was contaminated, then we stumble on the same question: why was there not an earlier outbreak in Indonesia, knowing that 60% of the production stays in Indonesia? So the only option then left for the events in the show to make sense is that not the entire flour production is contaminated. And perhaps in May, a contaminated batch of that production was sent to the US, and only 2 months later, the remainder of another contaminated batch, or the remainder of the contaminated batch, was sold locally, leading to the infections locally. In conclusion, the statement by Joel that you turn after eating the spores within a few days is incorrect. For the show to work, what really happens is that it takes about 60 days before you turn into a zombie if you ate an infected food. Not only that, that would also mean, which is, as far as I know, not explained in the show, is that there are multiple infected batches of flour. And that America got a batch delivered earlier and Indonesia delivered a bit later, so that would explain that the outbreaks almost happened simultaneously. Now, and that's something that we have to give credit to the show. The idea of spreading through the food chain clearly explains very easily why within a single country there might be multiple outbreaks simultaneously. But worldwide, there would still be time between outbreaks in different countries. Perhaps even enough time for some countries to go in quarantine, or for them to take measurements so that the contaminated food is removed from the shelves in those shops. I hope you enjoyed my vlog. Thank you for watching. Good evening, good night.